Hello and welcome to Blythe Ray Business News. Today I'm joined by Paul Foy. Paul is Chief Exec and founder of RentGuarantor, a company listed in London on the Aquis market. Paul, welcome on the show. RentGuarantor. The British people probably don't really know what a rent guarantor is. So before we get into this interview properly, what is a rent guarantor?
Indeed, a very good and genuine question. Very unusual in terms of the rental market, but mostly very common to people who borrow money from the traditional bank on the high street. So effectively, it's a guarantee to pay in the event of the tenant not being able to pay. And at RentGuarantor, we're a company who specialise in this particular area, and we will step into the shoes of a traditional parent and provide the landlord with the liquidity during the life of the tenancy and protect the tenancy on behalf of the tenant. So no evictions.
Quite a niche business, not one that's well understood in the UK, certainly. So how did Paul Foy go from doing whatever he was doing before into founding RentGuarantor? How did you get into this business?
Well, I'm a landlord here in the UK and have been for 25 odd years. I think I understand the business of being a landlord very well. I have a great relationship with my tenants. Most of my tenants are with me more than 10 or 12 years. And indeed, my longest tenant is 18 years, which I'm quite proud of. But obviously, during that period, you have the likes of the 2008, 2009 crash, and it presented lots of challenges both to me and to many landlords. And securing my rent was one of the big things that was really important for me. And indeed, I'm sure it's very important to every landlord. So looking at the market, I felt that there was a gap in the market for this type of service, but I also felt that tenants were being very badly treated by the law at the time. And we set up the company back in 2006. It was formerly known as Easy Let Limited, and obviously we went through a name change prior to just listing in 2020. So the name change to RentGuarantor makes the product and the service much sharper.
Okay, so you're heavily involved clearly in the rental sector in the UK, but I'd be fascinated to know, Paul, because you've been around the industry for a while, I'm picking up. What's your view generally on the housing market in the UK? I think we all know the shortage of housing, but what's the professionals' view on that and what needs to be done?
I see the housing market as an actual market, and it, like any market, it needs to flow in a very coherent way. And with the different change of ministers and the different policies and procedures that have been implemented, some of those have been very good, but some of them I think come in a very unthought out manner. So the tax changes, for example, that was introduced back in 2015 by the minister then, which was George Osborne, has led to a taxation model that I think is a little bit unfair for landlords. I believe landlords provide a fantastic service, and there are many people in Great Britain that wouldn't have a home without landlords. I think we need to grow that base of landlords, and at the moment, that's not actually happening. We've got about 1.5 million landlords controlling somewhere in the region of about 4 to 4.5 million properties in the UK. I don't see any reason why that shouldn't or couldn't be bigger. And it just needs to be incentivized a little bit to make the whole sector more appealing and less fractious than it actually is.
Well, it's one thing to increase the number of landlords, I take that point, but what about actually increasing the housing stock? Is that down to planning, or what do we need to do there?
So year on year, every year, we hear that there's a housing shortage. So the one thing that's very clear is, from all the government reports, including the Levelling Up report, which was issued earlier on this year, shortage is always the number one topic. If it's the number one topic and we know about it, then I would ask, why don't we do something about it? And clearly there's money and there's investors, so there's capital, there's a need. So therefore, why can't we join those two together with willingness? And unfortunately, I think the willingness is just not there. It needs a specific, clear way of thinking this out at policy level and implementing it over a 10 or 20-year period, not tinkering at the ends every time there's a budget or every time there's an opportunity to take some extra tax, because that is not delivering what tenants require. They require stability and they need surety, and I think landlords are no different. And I think if both were brought together in a coherent way through the eyes of the likes of the levelling up policy, we could probably address this problem over a 3 to 5 year period.
So you're saying in 3 to 5 years, if government applies itself, you can start to crack the housing crisis?
Indeed, absolutely. Let's be honest, it's only money. Money is available. We can create unique ways of incentivizing, whether it's a brown belt, green belt, additional development within local borough councils. We can have rejuvenation of areas of towns that are not currently working very well. All of these can be addressed in a coherent strategy. And I think for me, implementing like a capital tax break, which would be something like over a 10-year period, investors will definitely participate in such initiatives. And I think certainly within 5 years, you'd be well underway to meeting your targets.
So the country is now being governed by Paul Foy with his sensible policies to sort out the housing market. Let me draw you back to the core part of your business, the rental sector, looking at leases and things like that. I mean, I guess it's not been properly looked at for many, many years. We accept it as the way it is. Is it in the right shape? Should it be changed? And if so, how should it change?
Well, Tim, I'm not a historian when it comes to the private rental sector in the UK, but the one thing that's very clear to me is that there are many parts of it that haven't been addressed for an awful long time. You know, lease extensions, for example, that whole area needs to be certainly looked at. The assured short-hold tenancy agreement that we have, I believe that needs to be looked at. In fact, I think that there's probably 3 markets in the UK. There's clearly a home ownership model, which is for those that want to elect for that. There is the assured short-hold tenancy model, which suits people like students who are here for 1 or 2 years. But whether we like it or not, there's a group of people in the UK that probably will never rent a house, will never buy a house in the long term because it's not a choice they want to make. But they're happy to have a home which they can have within a rented building, but there's no framework for that to give them security of tenure. So I would like to see longer leases being available, like 5, 10, 15-year leases. And in fact, like Germany and other countries, these leases can trade on an open market. And if a tenant invests in a home where they have a long-term lease, it gives stability to the landlord. It gives income to the landlord to be able to pay their commitments, and it becomes a real long-term investment. So for me, I think that market needs to be really revisited and looked at.
I mean, I think you look at places like Germany, where there's a much stronger, bigger, vibrant rental property market. But yet, here we are in the UK. The Englishman's home is his castle. But culturally, people in the UK like to own their own home. I mean, are you saying you see that changing, Paul?
I would like that to change, because I think coming out with policies that set tenants up to fail in promising them that they can have their own home and own their own home is not always advisable or successful. So don't set somebody up to fail. If they want to live in rented accommodation, give them what they want, create a market within that particular segment. And if those people eventually want to go on and own a home, then fine, provide them with the pathways to doing that. But the choice of owning a long-term rental property is not here in the UK. And that being addressed would allow people the ability to be able to invest in the upkeep of that property, and it would stabilise a renter community in the UK.
You're a rent guarantor, you are a rent guarantor. You stand behind people, make sure that they don't lose out on their rental property. What part have the banks to play in all of this? And are they doing enough? And should the banks be changing their approach to the rental sector?
As a landlord, I know some of the mortgage terms that I've signed up to are again onerous. I have to take them seriously because they're financial commitments that I make. I believe that some of those terms and conditions are not conducive with what I would see as the tenant law here in the UK. And having to consult with your bank in some cases to allow a tenant to reside more than 1 year or 2 years, I think is a little bit unfair in the current climate. I think we should, as landlords, be treated as what we are, landlords. We sign up to buy-to-let contracts, so therefore it's assumed that you're going to rent these properties, and therefore we should be allowed to get on and behave in accordance with the legislation in this country, which, might I add, is very good legislation, and it's very strong legislation. And over the last 10, 15 years, certainly in my lifetime, it's been even further strengthened with different pieces of legislation coming out to protect tenants' rights in particular, and health and safety and so on. So it's a very nice regulated market, and we should be let do our business.
You mentioned regulated, so before I let you go, final question. There aren't many rent guarantors competing with RentGuarantor. I think I'm right in saying you are unique as the only one listed on the stock exchange here. Why did you go down that route, and what does being listed do for you?
So listing to me it had two angles. The first one obviously is the availability of capital should the business require to expand. And being a listed company, it just makes that task a little bit easier. But to be honest, I think from a business perspective, I wanted to bring the best possible level of governance to our business and what we do. And as a sector that's not actually covered by FCA regulation, I looked at what was available and decided by listing the company, it brought a dearth of experts around me to govern the business externally. So we have auditors, we have corporate advisors, we have the stock exchange, and obviously there's the legal framework around all of those. So we have to adhere to a very strict code of conduct, and that brings best practice to what we do on a daily basis.
So it's a halo of respectability, I suppose.
Indeed, indeed.
Paul, thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you back in the studio soon. That was Paul Foy, Chief Executive and founder of RentGuarantor. RentGuarantor can be found listed in London on the Aquis market. That's it from Blythe Ray Business News for this edition. Thanks for watching.